Hey everyone, welcome back. Today, I've got an absolutely jaw-dropping story for you. Trust. That's one thing I thought we had rock solid in our marriage. But hey, life loves a good curveball, doesn't it? It was just another Thursday, or so I thought, rummaging through drawers for my charger. Then I found her phone, buzzing with notifications, not usually a big deal, right? Except this time, it was. I wish I could say I didn't snoop, but those messages, they were like a car crash you can't look away from. Texts from AP, my assistant, no less. Stuff that would make a sailor blush. Might get twisted into knots. This wasn't just some flirty office banter. It was full-blown betrayal. So, I confronted her. Laid it all out. Her face went ghost white, then red hot. Denial. Accusations. The whole 9 yards. I was paranoid, delusional. But the evidence was glaring, right there in pixels and bytes. She kept denying, though, like if she said it enough, it might come true. I wasn't going to let this slide. I needed the truth, concrete and undeniable. Enter my pie. A guy who looked like he stepped out of a noir film. He got to work, tailing, taking snaps, the whole shebang. Meanwhile, I turned our home into my personal surveillance state. Cameras hidden in the most unassuming places. It felt wrong, but what choice did I have? Days passed. A weird mix of normalcy and espionage. Then, the pie hit the jackpot. Videos. Not just texts, but actual, irrefutable proof of her and AP, together. Watching it felt like a punch to the gut, each frame a betrayal. That night, I sat in our living room, the evidence laid out on the coffee table like some twisted exhibit. The truth was right there, undeniable. My next move was clear, but man, was it going to be a doozy. Never thought I'd be the guy serving cold, hard truth with the appetizers. But here I was, at our meticulously planned dinner party, where I'd unveil my wife's betrayal. Our closest friends and family, all gathered around, clueless about the storm brewing. I clinked my glass, signaling for silence. I've got a surprise, I announced, my voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside. The screen lit up, showing texts, emails, and, the grand finale, video evidence of my wife's affair with my assistant. Gasps echoed around the room. I watched their faces, a mix of shock and disbelief. My wife's face was a canvas of horror and denial. This is a misunderstanding, she stammered, but her words fell flat in the heavy air of betrayal. I didn't bask in the drama. Instead, I moved to the next act of my plan. Filing for divorce seemed like a natural step, but it was more strategic than emotional. I cited her affair as the reason, knowing it would influence the proceedings in my favor. My lawyer was a shark, and I was ready to let him loose. But the real blow was the asset freeze. I had our accounts and assets legally frozen, leaving her financially stranded. The look on her face when she realized the extent of her predicament was something I thought would bring me satisfaction. Instead, it was a hollow victory. In a desperate attempt, she pleaded for forgiveness, promising it was a mistake. I never meant for this to happen, she cried, tears streaming down her face. But her pleas fell on deaf ears. I was done being the understanding husband. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about reclaiming my life. As the chapter closes, I'm left with a mix of emotions. There's a sense of justice, sure, but also a profound sense of loss. I had loved her, after all. But that love was buried under layers of betrayal and deceit. The path ahead was clear, but it was a path I'd walk alone. You know, they say life's a roller coaster, but mine? It's more like a thriller movie, the kind that leaves you on the edge of your seat, heart pounding. It all started when a P, my right-hand man at work, vanished into thin air. Just like that, poof, gone. This was the guy who'd been warming my seat at home while I was out busting my chops. I should have been relieved, but his disappearance only thickened the plot. That's when the gears in my head started turning. If life wanted to play games, I was game. It was time for a little payback. A carefully orchestrated plan to teach my dear wife a lesson she wouldn't forget. The first move? A social media crusade. Nothing too dramatic, just a few well-placed posts to give people a glimpse of her true colors. The reactions were instant. A mix of shock, outrage, and for some, a bit of, I knew it. The fallout was like a line of dominoes. First, her job. She called me, tears and all, saying she got the boot. Scandal, they called it. I almost felt a pang of, something. But no, this was the bed she made. Then came the cold shoulder from friends, family, the whole entourage. She was like a pariah, and I was the puppet master, pulling the strings from behind the curtain. I'd be lying if I said I didn't enjoy it, watching her world crumble piece by piece. But there was this nagging voice in the back of my head, wondering if I'd gone too far. I shook it off. This was justice, right? Payback for all the lies, the deceit. I was the victim here, taking back control. As her world shrank, mine expanded. I was in the driver's seat, steering this narrative where I wanted it to go. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just about revenge. It was a show, a spectacle, and I was both the director and the lead actor. A part of me wondered, when the final curtain fell, what would be left of the stage we'd both played on. If someone had told me my life would turn into a twisted game of chess, I'd have laughed. But here I was, in the thick of it. It started with my wife, desperate and penniless, her accounts frozen solid by my doing. She was scrambling for pennies, a far cry from the life of luxury she was accustomed to. Watching her struggle stirred something in me, but my resolve was firm. This was her doing, her consequences to bear. Then came the eviction notice. I owned the house, and she had no legal claim to it. The notice was just a piece of paper, but it might as well have been a dagger. It felt like the final nail in the coffin of our shared life. She pleaded, cried, but I was deft at it. This was retribution, plain and simple. That life, oh, it loves its curveballs. Just when I thought I had the upper hand, a mysterious package landed on my doorstep. Inside, evidence that turned my world upside down. AP, the man I thought was just a cheating scoundrel, was actually a pawn in a larger game. He was targeting me, not just personally, but professionally, a hired gun by a rival business. It was like watching a thriller unfold, except I was the protagonist. My wife, as it turned out, was just a means to an end, a tool in their elaborate scheme to take me down. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. She was used, manipulated, just as I had been. This revelation threw me into a tailspin. The anger and thirst for revenge I'd been nursing was now mixed with a strange cocktail of guilt and confusion. Had I been too harsh? Was this really justice, or just another layer of the game? As my wife fought tooth and nail against the eviction and the asset freeze, I found myself in a moral quagmire. Part of me wanted to let her drown in the mess she'd helped create, but another part, a part I'd tried to silence, wondered if I was any better than those who'd set this chain of events in motion. Her legal battles were futile, her resources a mere fraction of what she once had access to. It was a losing fight, and we both knew it, but as I watched her struggle, a new battle raged within me. A battle between the man I'd become in the saga of revenge and the man I once was, before betrayal, before vengeance, before this all-consuming game had begun. This chapter of my life, it wasn't just about settling scores anymore. It was about unearthing truths, about understanding the real enemy, and perhaps, about confronting the demons within. Ever had one of those moments where everything feels like it's spinning out of control? That's where I found myself, right in the middle of my grand plan for revenge. It started off as a simple idea, a public event, the kind that would put my wife's dirty laundry out for everyone to see. I set the stage perfectly, ensuring every eye in the community would be on us. The night kicked off without a hitch. There she was, my soon-to-be ex-wife, clueless about what was about to hit her. The room was buzzing, and then I dropped the bomb. The evidence of her affair splashed across a giant screen. The gasps, the whispers, it was like music to my ears. But then, things took a turn. A couple of her die-hard friends, or what she had left of them, jumped to her defense. Words were thrown, tempers flared, and before I knew it, a full-blown physical altercation erupted. It was chaos, a whirlwind of shouting and shoving, and there I was, in the eye of the storm, feeling a rush I couldn't explain. But then, the unexpected happened. In the midst of all this madness, my wife collapsed. Stress, isolation, the whole scandal, it was too much for her. You'd think that would have been a wake-up call for me, right? A moment to step back and rethink this vendetta. But no, I was too far gone. My heart had turned to stone. I watched as she was rushed to the hospital, and I felt nothing. Just when I thought things couldn't get more twisted, enter the mysterious benefactor. Out of nowhere, someone started throwing support her way, pulling her out of the financial abyss I'd tossed her into. It was infuriating. Who was this person undermining my carefully laid plans? This chapter of our lives was like a game of chess, with moves and countermoves, but I was starting to lose track of who was playing who. There I was, thinking I was the puppet master, but with every twist and turn, I was left wondering, who really had the control? Life has a funny way of throwing curveballs, doesn't it? Just when you think you've got it all figured out, boom, you're hit with a revelation that turns everything on its head. That's exactly what happened to me. I was deep in my quest for revenge when I decided to dig a little deeper into AP, the man who turned my life into a living soap opera. I started digging into AP's past, and let me tell you, it was like peeling back layers of an onion. Each layer revealed something more rotten than the last. Turns out, this guy was a pro at playing people, a real-life puppet master. He'd been manipulating relationships for personal gain his whole career. Knowing this added a whole new flavor to the betrayal. It wasn't just a fling, it was a calculated move. Meanwhile, my wife, in a desperate attempt to salvage whatever dignity she had left, made a public apology. It was broadcasted for all to see, a display of remorse, or so it seemed. Part of me wondered if there was any sincerity in her words, if she truly regretted the pain she caused. But by then, my heart had hardened. I couldn't see past my own hurt and anger. So, I did what any self-respecting, scorned husband would do. I rejected her apology, and not just privately. I made sure everyone knew that her words meant nothing to me. This rejection, it was like the final nail in the coffin for her. I watched, almost detached, as she spiraled further down. Her life, once so full of charm and grace, was now in ruins. The vibrant woman I once knew was no more. In her place stood a broken shadow, a reminder of the damage caused by betrayal and revenge. It's strange, you know, being in this position. Part of me relished in her downfall, felt a sense of justice being served. But another part, a quieter, more reflective part, wondered if this was really victory. Watching her descent, I couldn't help but question what I'd become in this quest for retribution. Was I really the hero of this story, or had I turned into something else, something darker? Who would have thought, right? After all the chaos, the lies, the heartache, the man who started it all, my assistant, AP, just waltzes back into the picture. He shows up out of the blue, oozing charm and deceit, offering my wife a deal straight out of a spy movie. The nerve of this guy, he wanted her to betray me, to hand over sensitive company information in exchange for a fat stack of cash. As I watched from a distance, I could see the conflict in her eyes. She was cornered, desperate, her life a tattered mess because of the games we'd all been playing. I could tell part of her was considering it, weighing the option of one last betrayal for a chance to escape this nightmare. But then, something unexpected happened. She said no. After everything, after the lies, the affair, the public humiliation, she drew a line. She refused to sink further, to betray me again. It was a moment of clarity, a flicker of the woman I once knew, the one I thought I'd lost forever to greed and deception. That's when AP showed his true colors. The guy wasn't just a cheat, he was dangerous. He threatened to hurt me, to take me out of the picture if she didn't comply. The stakes were suddenly higher than any of us had anticipated. And then, another twist. My wife, the woman I'd vilified, the one I'd pushed to the brink, came to me with a warning. She told me everything. AP's return, his offer, his threat. It was a surreal moment, standing there, listening to her, realizing that despite the venomous path our lives had taken, there was still a shred of concern, of care. It was a chapter straight out of a thriller, with betrayals, threats, and unexpected alliances. The lines between right and wrong, between revenge and justice, they were all blurred. Here we were, in the middle of a game that had spiraled out of control. A game where the only winning move was not to play. But the question remained, were we too far gone to back out now? Life's funny, you know. One moment you're on top of the world, the next, you're setting a trap for the guy who tried to ruin your life. That's where I found myself after my wife's bombshell warning about AP's comeback and his devious plans. I was burning with a mix of anger and a strange sense of gratitude. There she was, trying to save me from the mess she helped create. Irony at its finest, huh? So, I hatched a plan, a real cunning one. I used the info she gave me, turned the tables on AP. It was like setting up a chessboard, every piece moving exactly as I wanted. And man, did it work. AP walked right into the trap, thinking he was the hunter when he was actually the prey. The look on his face when the cops slapped those cuffs on him was priceless. All his schemes, his manipulations, they crumbled to dust right there. But here's the kicker, even with AP out of the picture, things between me and my wife were too far gone. There was no fairy tale ending, no tearful reconciliation. The betrayal, the lies, they were too deep, the wounds too raw. We were past the point of no return. And it didn't end there for her. With AP's arrest, all sorts of skeletons came tumbling out of the closet. She got tangled up in the legal mess, facing charges for her part in the whole debacle. It was a hard fall from grace, and I didn't lift a finger to break her fall. Then came the divorce settlement. Let's just say the prenup was a lifesaver. I walked away with everything, leaving her with nothing but memories and regrets. I know it sounds harsh, but hey, actions have consequences, right? The final blow? She ended up homeless. Yeah, you heard that right. From living in luxury to having nowhere to call home. Her life, once so full of promise and laughter, now a shadow of its former self. As I close this chapter, I can't help but wonder, was it worth it? The revenge, the satisfaction of seeing her life crumble, did it really make up for the betrayal? I guess some questions don't have easy answers. All I know is, life goes on, and so do I, in a world that's a little less bright, a little less kind. Life's a funny thing, you know? Just when you think you've got it all figured out, it throws you a curveball that knocks you off your feet. That's where I found myself, in the aftermath of it all. Rebuilding my life, focusing on my business, trying to find some semblance of normalcy in the chaos that had become my existence. The community, well, they were split right down the middle. Some looked at me as a hero, a man who stood up for himself. Others, they pitted her, the woman who lost everything. You could feel the tension, the whispers, the judgments. It was like living in a fishbowl, every move scrutinized, every decision judged. Then came my wife's regret. It was like a floodgate had opened, apologies and pleas for forgiveness pouring out. But it was too late. The bridge was burned, the damage done. I couldn't find it in me to forgive, to forget. I was moving on, or at least trying to. But life, oh, it had other plans. Enter the plot twist. A long-lost friend of mine reappears out of the blue. And guess what? He was the mysterious benefactor helping my wife all this time. Talk about a stab in the back. Here I was, thinking I knew my friends, my enemies. But the lines, they were all blurred. He believed in second chances, redemption, all that jazz. But me? I felt betrayed, tricked. It was a rift that couldn't be mended, a friendship lost in the crossfire of my vendetta. And just when I thought I'd seen it all, my wife, beaten down by life, makes one final plea. Not for love, not for reconciliation, but for survival. She was at rock bottom, and even then, I couldn't bring myself to lend a hand. It was a decision that weighed on me, a reminder of the cost of revenge. This chapter of my life was a crossroads, a test of character and loyalty. What do you do when the lines between right and wrong are blurred? How do you choose between self-preservation and compassion? These were the questions that haunted me, as I stood at the precipice of a new life, forever changed by the events that had unfolded. If you told me a year ago that my life would turn out like this, I would have laughed you out of the room. But here I am, staring at the ruins of everything I once held dear. It all came crashing down, starting with me slamming the door shut on my wife's final plea. There was no going back, no more chances. I was determined to close this chapter of my life, no matter the cost. My wife, left with nothing, surprised me though. She found this resilience, this will to survive despite being at rock bottom. Watching from afar, I saw her grappling with new challenges, legal battles, health issues, the whole 9 yards. It was like she was clawing her way out of a hole, determined not to let the darkness consume her. But, as I sat in my tower of solitude, the winds began to shift. The community, which once had my back, started to turn. Whispers of my ruthlessness, my cold-hearted revenge, began to spread. Friends became strangers, and strangers became critics. My reputation, once my most prized possession, was now tarnished. Then, the unthinkable happened. My empire, my business, which I had sacrificed so much to protect and grow, began to crumble. It was a slow, painful process, like watching a house of cards collapse in slow motion. I had been so focused on my vendetta, so consumed by my need for retribution, that I had neglected the very foundation of my success. In the end, it wasn't just my wife who lost everything. I stood amidst the wreckage of my own making, realizing the heavy price of my vengeance. My once flourishing business was now a shadow of its former self, my personal life a barren wasteland of broken relationships and lost connections. As the chapter closed on this tumultuous saga, I couldn't help but reflect on the irony of it all. In my quest to punish my wife, to make her pay for her betrayal, I had lost everything. My story, which began as a quest for justice, ended as a cautionary tale about the destructive power of revenge. There was no peace, no satisfaction, just the hollow emptiness of a man who had let his thirst for vengeance consume him. Stick around until the end to see how everything unfolded, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more intense stories. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. All this time I was sure that our marriage was strong and reliable. I was ready to do everything to make our life happy and full of love. But one day I discovered that my wife was only using me as a means to her own ends. She had cheated on me, and it was not the first time. I realized that all along she had her own plan and I was just a puppet in her hands. But I wasn't going to stay idle and decided to get back at her for her betrayal. Matvey and Alina had known each other since high school. The boy had been in love with the first beauty of their school for many years and once even worked up the courage to ask her out. But she sharply rejected him. She preferred to go out with a cocky high school student named Pasha. He seemed mature and very cool to her. Matvey sometimes heard other girls whispering behind his back discussing his unrequited love. And Alina herself was with Pavel right up until graduation. After graduation Matvey studied at university working in parallel and after graduation began to rise by leaps and bounds on the career ladder. He managed to get a job at an international company. He began to earn a lot of money. He bought himself a spacious apartment and a nice car and helped his parents. He also liked to travel. The impressions of travel greatly energized him. One day he was invited to another meeting of classmates. Matvey decided to go there for a change. It was there that his meeting with Alina took place many years later. When she saw Matvey she could not even believe her eyes. The man, though clothed, was restrained but she roughly understood the cost of all these things on him. They were talking. Alina questioned her former suitor with great interest about what he was living now. And by the minute she was getting more and more into some kind of relationship with him. They exchanged phone numbers and the next day Alina was the first to call. Now after all these years she herself made a date with Matvey. Over all these years he had not lost his warm feelings for Alina. And although in the past she had rejected him and dated someone else, none of that mattered. Now they met as adults. And Matvey was glad that Alina was finally interested in him herself. Their relationship began very quickly. Alina knew what she wanted from this life. So the slow development of the novel did not interest her. Their wedding took place just 6 months later. Although Matvey's parents tried to tell him it was too soon. And it was still necessary to get to know each other better. They began to travel together. Matvey showed his wife various countries and their local colors. Alina watched everything with her mouth open and was as excited as a child. When they returned to their city the woman began to take more and more of her work from Hula. Explaining that she was not feeling well. At the same time she often began to complain to her husband that she was very tired of working. Her bosses didn't appreciate her. And she felt that she was wasting her time there. These were no longer subtle hints but real manipulations. And Matvey fell for it. He still could not rejoice that the love of his youth, now his lawful spouse. Of course after all this talk he himself suggested that she quit her job and rest at home. He would take care of everything. Alina's dream finally came true. She lives in her husband's luxurious apartment. He allows her not to work and does not deny her anything. They lived like this for a few more years. And then her husband's business trip, which lasted several weeks, happened. He and his wife would call each other late at night. But sometimes she would miss a call. Claiming that she was very tired from the day. When Matvey returned it was as if the atmosphere in his home had changed. His wife did not welcome him with the same joy as usual. She acted rather reserved and even a little aloof which really hurt the man. He thought she had something going on or was just in a bad mood. So he didn't emphasize it. Intuitively he sensed that something was wrong. But he didn't give it much thought. During the next month that he was in town his wife's being just as slightly different. She started spending more and more time with her girlfriends. Sometimes returning home and even later than her husband. When Matvey asked her what she was doing all that time away from home. She said that her best friend was also out of work now. And they went to salons and sports centers together or just went for a walk. One day Motvy was supposed to have a business meeting at a restaurant in the center of town. On that day things did not go well from the very morning. First he left important documents at home and on his way back to pick them up. He was late for work. Then some minor mishaps at the office threw him off balance. And now he was stuck in a traffic jam not far from that very restaurant. As he sat in his car irritably texting his colleague that he might be late because of the traffic situation, his attention was caught by two silhouettes gliding outside the window. Motvy looked up and saw a couple. His wife was walking with some man and was hanging out with him interestedly. The husband's previously unknown feeling of jealousy pricked him. He could see for sure that it was his wife and how she was enjoying herself in the company of another man. Interesting choice of girlfriends she has, of course. He thought irritatedly. The traffic was moving very slowly and Motvy decided to follow where the two men were going. They were going straight to the restaurant where Motvy himself was headed. After about 10 minutes all the cars parted and the man was able to turn around and park beside the place. He went in very carefully looking around to see where his wife was sitting but at the same time not to get caught. He was lucky. The table at which his meeting was taking place was at a decent distance from the table where Alina was sitting with her companion. While this colleague was talking to his partners, Motvy was watching his wife without blinking. At last he could make out who she was with. The face seemed painfully familiar but the man had to strain his memory hard to figure out who it was. With horror to himself he recognized in her companion, Paul, the same one Alina had dated back in high school. With each passing minute his faith in the best was evaporating faster and faster. Alina openly flirted with Pasha and at one point he began stroking her thigh. Motvy desperately wanted to take out the anger that was boiling inside of him on these two but he was held hostage to the situation. The meeting was very important. He could not lose face. As a result, the man thought, since these two were acting this way, their relationship had not lasted the first day. Yes, he was hurt because of this infidelity. He was ready to tear up and throw up. But he understood that these emotions would not make things better. He could deal with the unfaithful spouse later but now he had better things to do. He concentrated on the negotiations and held them to the highest standard. Alina and her lover left before he did. It was obvious they were in a hurry to finally get some privacy. Afterwards, Motvy drove home. He threw all of Alina's belongings into bags and took them to the nearest garbage can. When the trader returned home, she was extremely surprised. The door was locked from the inside with a latch. Then her husband opened it. He said that now she no longer lived here. And if she had time, she could still fight the local bums at the dump for her clothes. The woman first thought her husband was joking but when the door slammed in her face, she realized that he had found out. The couple divorced. Motvy was even glad that his mother had insisted on a prenuptial agreement before the wedding. It turned out to be very convenient. Alina never once apologized to Motvy for her betrayal. Nothing bad happened for her. She simply acted out of self-interest. For a long time after school, she was constantly on and off with Pavel because he could not provide her with everything. But when she found out that Pavel's financial situation had improved, she was the first to make contact. In fact, he was the only one she really loved. But his plight a few years ago prevented her from staying with him. She met Matthew and realized that he could give her the life she wanted. Now she began to live with Pavel again. Motvy understood that Alina would forever be the one who would be constantly on the lookout for a better place. She would change her partners an endless number of times without sticking with anyone for long. Instead of building a future with her husband, helping him and reaching for the heights together, she has chosen to live a parasitic lifestyle. But life is complicated. And staying on the crest of success all the time won't work. Black bars happen to everyone. So the claim that Paul was lucky to stay with such a woman together was highly questionable. She would stay with him, but only until his first bad luck. Second story. I might never have known the truth about my wife. But when my friend suddenly showed up with the words, "I need to tell you something about your wife," I felt something was wrong. I couldn't even think what he was going to say. But what followed was so amazing that I didn't know what to do next. It turned out that my wife had been cheating on me for months. And my friend had known about it all along. He told me everything he knew. And I decided to take justice into my own hands. I got my revenge on her for cheating. In this video, I will tell you the whole story. And you will learn how I found out the truth about my wife. And how I decided to get revenge on her. Ruslan and Sophia had been married for 6 years. Sonia was a manicurist. And Ruslan worked for a small company as a landscape designer. A couple of years ago, they took an apartment on a mortgage. And were gradually fixing it up. The couple had been trying for over a year to have a child. Both were ready to take on the role of parents. But nothing worked. Even though they had already had some tests done. And everything was normal. They did not want to take any drastic steps. So they just kept hoping that someday they would finally get lucky. Ruslan had a good friend whose name was Andrew. The man, unlike his companion, was lonely and lived alone. He did not have much luck in relationships. At some point, he had already accepted this state of affairs. And stopped busting his neck to get acquainted with anyone. He was comfortable enough as it was. They had met in high school and had been in touch ever since. As adults, they didn't see each other that often. But when they did meet, it was as if they hadn't been together all that time. One afternoon, Andrew was going about his business. and decided to walk through the park. His head was occupied with the repairs he was making, so he hardly paid any attention to those who passed him by. Suddenly, he stumbled over some rock in the middle of the path, and it snapped him out of his heap of thoughts. He glanced around to see if anyone had noticed his fall, when suddenly, he spotted a familiar silhouette ahead. He stepped a little closer and recognized her. It was Sophia, his friend's wife. She was walking in the company of a man. "Sonia, hello?" shouted Andrew, walking a little closer. The woman turned around. "Andrew, hello. I didn't expect to see you here." The man had already held out his hand to her companion to say hello. "Andrei Kostya." At that moment, the woman tensed a little. She bit her lip and then said with a laugh. "This is my brother. He came to town for the day. Here to give us a tour. We're really in a bit of a hurry, sorry." Andrew replied that it was no big deal. He asked him to say hello to Ruslan. And then they said goodbye. He stared intently at Konstantin's face. Something tensed him in the whole situation. It was either Sanja's reaction or her hurry. For a second, he even thought there was far from a kinship between these two. But the telephone call from a client distracted him, pushing the man's doubts away. In the flow of events and working moments, Andrew had completely forgotten about the situation in the park. He was not even surprised at the absence of a call from Ruslan. Usually, if he said hello to him through his acquaintances, he considered it his duty to call and meet him. But the friend did not show up until a few months later. One evening, Ruslan dialed his comrade and informed him in a joyful voice that soon he would finally become a father. You know, nothing much had happened before that. And here is the real news and I decided to share it with you. Andrew sincerely congratulated his friend. He knew how long he and his wife had come to this. At the end of the year, in the winter, Ruslan even invited him to the maternity hospital to be discharged. Afterward, they sat together for a while and celebrated. Later, there was a lull. The couple fully immersed themselves in taking care of the baby. The world began to revolve around him. From time to time, they would write to each other. But for the most part, Ruslan was immersed in his work to provide his family with everything they needed. They had not seen each other for over a year. And one day on his day off, Andrew was passing through the neighborhood where his comrade lived. He had to pick up an order at the pickup point, which was in their house. And by happy coincidence, he met Ruslan in the street. He was strolling along with the stroller. Andrei shouted at him and he gestured for him to keep his voice down. The child dozed off. It turned out that his wife had sent him for a walk with his son and wanted to relax and unwind. The friends were talking. Andrew looked at the little boy and asked if he could tell what the child looked like. He looked more like his mother. He didn't take anything from me as if he didn't like it, apparently. He made a joke. My friend did not appreciate the joke. He suddenly remembered seeing his wife with some stranger whom she introduced as her brother. And this was not long before the news of the pregnancy. "I'm sorry, don't take this the wrong way, but have you ever considered that the baby might not be yours?" Andrei asked seriously. Ruslan looked at him like he was crazy. He laughed and asked why he suddenly thought so. A friend snapped and decided to tell him that he had seen his wife with someone in the park at the time. After that, Ruslan was not so cheerful anymore. "Well, hello. She certainly didn't tell me from you. She didn't say that she saw you at all. And your brother? Kostya, you say? She doesn't have any brothers and I don't remember any cousins," he said thoughtfully. "And she certainly did not tell me that any of her relatives visited her at that time." This news shook Ruslan. He still felt euphoric that he finally had his heir. Besides, he had always found that he and his wife had a good relationship. But now doubts about his wife's faithfulness had settled in his mind. Yes, and at a time when they were ready to give up, and she suddenly became pregnant. At that time, Ruslan thought it was a miracle. But now everything was covered with a shroud of doubt. He thanked his friend for telling him about the incident, even though it was so much later. That night, he had waited for his wife's return more anxiously than ever before. He knew there was a serious talk to be had. As he waited for her, sitting in complete silence in the kitchen, he went over in his head all the suspicious things that he might in the past have simply turned a blind eye to. When their next attempt to have a baby failed, he felt at one point as if his wife had grown cold to the idea altogether. She didn't say she'd changed her mind, but you could feel it in the look on her face. Then there was even some coldness between them. But Ruslan put it down to hormonal background. The man decided to call his mother-in-law and find out from the source whether there was a certain Konstantin among his wife's brothers after all. He veiled this strange question by saying that a certain man came to their house when Sonia was away and introduced himself as her brother. Our fears had already been confirmed. There was no such man among her cousins or even third cousins. When the man hung up, Sonia had just returned home. After she had checked on the baby, the man decided to start a conversation. He began from afar, mentioning Kostya, who had recently dropped in on her as if to visit. Ruslan decided not to specify the degree of their relationship and just watched her reaction. Sonia did not make eye contact. She constantly looked away. When the man's name came up, it was as if she tensed up. But she tried not to show it. "Do you know him, dear?" her husband asked in a calm tone. "Yes, he's a former colleague." "And what did he want?" pronounced Sonia. "He wanted to see his child." The husband decided to go along with the provocation. Sonia went dramatically pale and didn't blink for a couple of seconds. She opened and closed her mouth like a fish on dry land. Ruslan decided to squeeze her. So he's right, isn't he? You didn't cheat with him, did you? It seems time to do a paternity test. His words thundered to his wife. Then she tried to pull herself together. I've been agonizing for hours to give you a son. And you're doing this to me. She howled. Well, if it really is my baby, what do you have to worry about? Her husband said calmly. The expression on the woman's face was as if she were ready to burst with anger. Forgetting about the sleeping baby, she started yelling at her husband for trying to avoid responsibility for the baby like a coward. She threatened that now she would go to her mother and Ruslan would never see her again. Then she tearfully began packing her belongings. The expertise made it clear that the baby was not Ruslan after all. After that, he and Sonia scandalously divorced. The man was both angry and depressed by this news. He had already managed to get used to the role of the father, attached to this little lump of happiness. All this time, Andra had been by Ruslan's side and supported him in this difficult period. Sonia went to her parents. By then, she had long been out of touch with her lover. But now, feeling vulnerable, she tried to resume communication with him. But Kostya himself was not eager to do so. He already had his own family and he did not care about Sonia. So, in an attempt to deceive her husband, the woman lost her own game. Such is the story. Share in the comments what you think about this situation and the behavior of the characters. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more jaw-dropping stories. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. At the time this went down 4 months ago, my wife, 35, and I, 33, had been married for 2 years. I was scheduled to go on a 2-day-long business trip, leaving extremely early one day and returning the next day in the evening. Well, after 5 hours of driving, the trip was cancelled. I wasn't terribly bothered because I was used to driving and would be compensated for my time. I decided to return home unexpectedly. When I arrived, I was surprised to see another car parked beside my wife's. It was her brother's car. He was a buff dude, married with a baby that my wife would often babysit. She loved it because she looked forward to becoming a mother. Her and her brother were really close and enjoyed hiking. It didn't matter what the weather was like, all year round they would go on long hiking expeditions together. I didn't mind, it was their thing and I was not an outdoorsy person. I'd usually work a little more or dedicate time to my hobby of building miniature boats. Although I fully supported their relationship, I became a little weary of my wife's brother when he became exceptionally emotional at our wedding and planted a huge kiss on his sister's lips. I couldn't do anything about it, it happened so fast. He asked me to forgive him later, blaming what he did on the high emotions he felt seeing his sister get married and leave the family. When I arrived home and parked behind my wife's car, I could hear slow music playing loudly. It was an odd setting to imagine my wife and brother-in-law in. I didn't have to imagine it because I walked in on them slow dancing together. He was holding her close to his body, their embrace was that of a romantic couple's. When they noticed my presence, they broke apart quickly and looked really guilty. I knew my marriage was in jeopardy by their expressions. My wife tried to say her brother needed emotional support because his marriage was struggling. To me, that did not explain why they were slow dancing in my living room. As hard as it was, I didn't ask them any more questions. They were aware of how odd it looked. I didn't have to wait long before my wife went to go babysit her baby niece one day. She accidentally left her phone behind and I found her WhatsApp. It revealed that she was sexting her brother, sending pictures, saying I love you, and arranging hookups with him by claiming she was going to babysit. It was the most disgusting and disturbing discovery I ever made in my life. I threw her phone and ran to the bathroom to be sick. Everyone always assumed they were really close because they had trouble making friends when they were younger and shared an enthusiasm for hiking that no one else in the family did. I wouldn't confront her about it immediately because it certainly wouldn't have stopped them. I realized that I was just the cover husband so she could have a secret sexual relationship with her blood brother. I went back to her phone as I boiled with anger and betrayal and took screenshots to send to myself. I planned out my revenge, which involved a bit of acting on my part. It was excruciating to see her behave so normally when returned home, like she didn't just hook up with her brother behind my back. I too acted as though everything was normal. I laid awake beside her that night in our marital bed. The very next morning, I hired a PI to get me photos of them. When I announced the truth, she wouldn't be able to wiggle out of the consequences. Not long after, she claimed she was going on a hiking trip with her brother and I played along, notifying the PI. He called me late that night and notified me that she got hotel room with her brother along the beach a few hours away. I started packing my things because it was only a matter of time before I got pictures. I didn't know why they weren't actually hiking together this time, but I didn't care either. At this point, I didn't care about anything and just felt numb. I received pictures of them walking on the beach and boardwalk like newlyweds. His hand on her butt, full kisses on the lips, staring into each other's eyes over drinks at the bar, both of them entering a hotel room, clearly in a romantic relationship. I was ready to leave, but before I left, I invited her immediate and extended family and friends over, including her brother's wife and baby. I printed large copies of the pictures I received and hung them all over the house, starting at the front door. On my way out, I left a note on the door instructing them to let themselves in. Little did they know, I left town for my friend's house with all my belongings and no plans to return. They called me after they entered home, frantically asking me what those pictures were. I spelled it out for them on speakerphone. These two members of the family were incestuous freaks that have probably been in a sexual relationship since they lived with their parents. Then I told them where they currently were if they didn't believe me and wanted to see for themselves. Hours later, I got a call from my soon-to-be ex-wife. She was screaming and I could hear the chaos in the background. It became clear that her entire family and a few of her friends had shown up at their hotel. Her brother was being beaten by cousins and the hotel called the police. She asked why I did this to her and I told her she deserved it. She had been living a lie that she wouldn't be able to continue anymore. I told her the divorce papers were on the table and she started wailing, so I hung up. I was hurt enough as it was and didn't want to dwell on how her life would turn out. Her mom called me a few days later to apologize on behalf of her daughter and son. She updated me and said the police never arrived at the hotel, so hotel staff started breaking up the fight themselves. In the chaos, the brother and sister fled to escape scrutiny. The whole family was a wreck for a few days, but things are settling amongst them now. The wife of the brother is filing for divorce as well, along with custody and child support. Before they fled, neither of them signed divorce papers, so that's a waiting game for now. I'm relieved this was all exposed when it was because I can't imagine continuing that relationship any longer without knowing the truth. I just want to put this all behind me and I feel like I'm on the right track. I found a nice place and continue working for the same company I was in. I'm continuing to take this one step at a time. This whole thing is still so surreal for me. I can't imagine the emotional torment you've been through. I'm so relieved you didn't decide to start having children with her before all of this was revealed. It would have been horrible if she got pregnant by her brother and tried to claim the inbred child was yours. Although this discovery caused you pain, it is so much better that the truth is out. I love how you handled this situation because you knew announcing it immediately wouldn't cause them to stop and might have even backfired on you. You were patient and fast, aiming to gather the much-needed evidence you required. These two people are horrible, not just because of their actions, but because they married two people and hid the affairs they had. I believe luck is on your side. This couldn't have been worse if it came out years later. I wish you the best of luck, OP. Now for today's second story. My wife and I were both busy working people when I discovered our marriage was over. She was 27 and I was 33. We were only married for 2 years, but maybe that was a good thing. On the day it went down, we arranged a short getaway together at a cabin almost 2 hours away from our house. After we arrived and got settled, she asked me to look up a recipe she wanted to make for dinner. My phone was almost dead, so I plugged it in and wondered how she was going to handle this. Over the past few months, I noticed she was distancing herself from me. She was on her phone way more and even added a passcode on it. This was weird because we worked so much, who would be trying to access her phone? She was so open with me up until it all changed and she just didn't feel the need to tell me about her day. So I told her my phone was charging to see what she'd do. She unlocked her phone and tossed it to me as she stirred, telling me to look it up on hers. I did so and read it to her. As I was just about to lock her phone again to be locked out of it forever, a silent WhatsApp notification appeared. I didn't know she had that app. I clicked on it instinctively and it led me to a string of messages between her and another man. The first 2 messages were, "Hey, how's it going? And I miss you so much. Can't stop thinking about how good you feel." I must have turned white because I felt the blood drain from my face. My vision became blurry and I left the room with her phone. She was still cooking, unaware anything was wrong. I focused my eyes and stilled my trembling hands so I could keep reading older stuff. It spanned back farther than I was willing to look. I took screenshots of their sexting pictures, talk of past sex and plans for future sex. And there I love you. I grabbed my keys with her phone in my hand and left. I didn't say anything to her. As I drove, I forged a message to her lover saying that the getaway ended early and he should meet her at a specific restaurant at a specific time. He agreed. I drove for 2 hours, although it felt like forever. I was in deep thought about what my future held now that my marriage was over. I already had anxiety about the next woman. I fall in love with cheating on me. I wondered what this guy was going to try to do or say to me, but it didn't really matter. The most I wanted was an explanation. When I saw him enter, I recognized him from the pictures and videos. I entered the restaurant right behind him and wrapped my arm around his shoulders. He jerked away and looked at me with major concern. Before he could say anything, I told him who I was, that he stole my wife from me and that we should talk about it. I led him to a table, started recording on my phone, which now had all the evidence from my wife's phone as well, and told him to spill the beans. He hesitated, but I told him this was the least he could do. He told me they had been seeing each other for about 10 months already. They were introduced by coworkers and instantly fell for each other. In a few weeks, she was in his bed. He swore she was the one for him and he was in love. I told him he could have it. I had no more use for her. I thanked him profusely for saving me 18 years of child support. I told him where she was and asked him to go pick her up. I drove home with a broken heart. It was broken before, but it was worse knowing how long ago this started. My phone rang and it was the landline from the cabin we were staying at. My wife was panicked, asking me if I was okay and why I just left like that. She added that she couldn't find her phone and forgot we had a landline. I called her a liar and said she shouldn't have let me see her phone if she was guilty of having an affair. She was stunned and started stuttering to make excuses. I told her she need not bother, that I had already met with the man and got all the proof I need. She started yelling in surprise, trying to clarify where I knew and who I spoke to. I added that he was on the way to come get her and she should pack all of our stuff. She said something else, but I hung up. I arrived home and packed up what I needed to be okayed for a few months. I didn't know how long she'd be in the house before she left. Thankfully we got a prenup so I wouldn't lose the house or pay her alimony. The last thing I did was update her social media. Changed her status to single and posted a selfie of the two. I put her phone down and heard it immediately start blowing up with confused friends and family. I called my best friend to vent and cry, and not only did he have space for me to stay for a while, but he also arranged for me to meet with his cousin, a divorce attorney. Before my friend arrived to pick me up, my wife was brought home by her lover. She was upset with me, which was ridiculous, and she kept asking me questions. For someone who knew what was going on, she sure was clueless. I started playing the recording of her lover explaining how they met and started sleeping together. She started crying her eyes out, claiming that he was exaggerating their relationship and she never planned on leaving me or continuing to see him. When she said this, he was standing in the doorway unbeknownst to her. He was offended and left. I thought good for him as he drove down the road, and my wife screamed in frustration. I told her to pack her stuff and get out of the house because it belonged to me. I added that I'd send divorce papers to her parents' house. She sat on the front step crying as I left. I heard that she was still living with them when her boyfriend left her after an astounding 2 months. Since I had been paying for her schooling, she struggled to afford it on her own. Her parents couldn't afford it and actually made her move into a tiny apartment with her much younger sister. Meanwhile, I met the love of my life and we have our second child on the way. I can now say without a doubt that my wife is faithful, loving, and meant for me. I'm so thankful I decided to leave my ex right away without staying and trying to work it out. I am so sorry you went through this, OP. Thank the universe you didn't end up raising an affair child as your own or paying child support for years. It's extremely lucky you discovered the truth when you did and had the strength to take the steps you needed to. She started sleeping with a coworker without much hesitation or thought about her marriage with you. It turned out that even the man she cheated on you with dumped her. This is an excellent story to help spread hope to people that have been cheated on. It's definitely possible to let go of what you're used to and exist outside your comfort zone in order to heal and live a better life. I wish you and your new wife all the best. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. Hey everyone, welcome back. Today, I have an unbelievable and intense story to share with you. I am 36 years old and my wife is 38. We first met when I was in my 3rd year of college and she was in her 4th. We've been together since that day. After 3 years of dating, we decided to move in together. 3 more years passed and we got married. 2 years later, our joy increased when my wife became pregnant and we welcomed the birth of our daughter. As in any normal family, we had a fair share of domestic quarrels, but we always managed to make up quickly, sometimes even in the midst of a quarrel. Overall, we were a classic family. After finishing my education, I started my career path by working hard to climb the corporate ladder. In the end, I earned enough to afford a spacious 4-room apartment. We invested in a major renovation and happily settled in our new apartment. My wife also resumed her career after maternity leave and everything went well for her. She got a good position and started earning a decent income. By combining our income, we were financially prosperous. Over time, we acquired everything we needed, a new apartment for our growing daughter, expensive cars, and all the amenities that one could wish for. Life seemed abundant. I deeply loved my wife and remained faithful to her throughout our marriage. I was not a heavy drinker, but sometimes I allow myself to drink a glass of wine at dinner. Smoking was a habit I recently gave up. We always planned our holidays together and I developed a passion for diving and skiing. While my wife decided not to dive out of fear, she learned to ski. Our life revolved around work, earning money, and enjoying the fruits of our labor. My wife's work was connected with international business, which often required her to receive colleagues from abroad for negotiations. Gradually, I began to notice that her communication with these colleagues seemed to last longer than before. Although it seemed curious to me, at first, I didn't pay much attention to it. Another notable change was that she started receiving Snapchat messages in the evenings. Strangely, whenever her foreign colleagues were around, these messages stopped coming. I checked her phone a couple of times after she fell asleep, but all the messages were deleted. I noticed that the last message was always around 7 p.m., despite the fact that the phone received notifications after she had already gone to bed. In the end, suspicion consumed me completely. One day, she came home late around 10 p.m. and I, foolishly, jokingly asked if she had said goodbye to her lover. The fear that flashed in her eyes was something I had never seen before. However, as soon as she realized that I was teasing her, she smiled and brushed it off, calling me a fool. Moreover, she sometimes went abroad to visit her colleagues in return. When my suspicions reached a peak, I couldn't take it anymore. I resorted to installing a spyware on her phone, which allowed me to control it remotely via SMS or from my personal account. This program could record the audio of the environment, take photos with the camera, and send all the data to my personal account. One day, she went on another business trip, and in the evening, I came home from work. I spent time with our daughter, helped her with her homework, and put her to bed by 10 p.m. As soon as she fell asleep, I gained access to the spyware account and ordered it to record her phone's surrounding sound for 10 minutes. After a few minutes, a recording appeared on my account, and after listening to it, I heard my wife's voice in the room with a man. They spoke English and I understood every word. They discussed the mundane aspects of life and laughed. I realized that they were alone in the room. Suddenly, I heard the clink of glasses in their laughter. At that moment, my heart started pounding wildly. I sent another command to record for an additional 20 minutes and take a picture of the environment. To my horror, the photo turned out to be a black square indicating that the phone was placed with the camera down. I quickly instructed the program to take a picture using the front camera. The resulting photo showed the phone lying on the bedside table in the room, a part of the headboard of the bed, and a wall lamp standing next to it. 15 minutes later, another recording appeared that made me shiver. I played the tape back and heard them laughing and talking again. I found myself in a state of disbelief and shock, if my whole world was collapsing before my eyes. Stunned, I poured myself a drink and ordered the program to record for 4 hours, after which I drowned my sorrows in alcohol. The next morning, Thursday, I was completely shattered. Since it was time for my daughter to go to school, I told her that she was not required to attend classes that day. I notified my boss that I would take a couple of personal days until Monday. My wife was supposed to return on Sunday. Then I sat down and started listening to the 4-hour recording. However, I only managed to listen for 40 minutes because it was at that moment that I heard the unmistakable sounds of my wife's pleasure, the same sounds that I had known well for more than 13 years. It felt like a knife was stabbed into my heart, causing both emotional and physical pain. Stunned, I rushed to the bathroom and threw up, unable to figure out if it was from a hangover or from the current situation. I stood under an icy shower for 20 minutes, desperately looking for some relief. After that, I took her daughter to visit her grandparents, assuring her that I would explain everything later and return home alone. My wife called during lunch and sincerely asked how I was doing. I stood there in silence, unable to say a word, pretending that the connection was bad. I told her that I was unwell and would stay at home for a couple of days, and that I entrusted our daughter to the care of her grandmother. That day was the most painful in my life. I witnessed a personal hell, feeling completely lost and unsure of what to do. My head was filled with an incessant buzzing that drowned out my own thoughts. I sat on the couch and cried like a child as waves of anger and apathy overwhelmed me. The more I expressed my emotions, the more they dulled in me. By the end of the day, I was emotionally exhausted. In the evening, I returned to the spyware account and started issuing commands to the phone. I got the photos. Some were taken from her bag and others from the table. There were recordings of her performances in restaurants with numerous voices, obviously her colleagues. Then in the course of the evening, I came across something. The phone was again on the bedside table, recording her voice along with someone else's. However, this time, there were no intimate sounds. Unable to take it anymore, I called her. After 4 rings, she answered, noticeably out of breath. I asked her about her heavy breathing, to which she replied that the hotel elevator had failed, and she had to climb the stairs to her room. I talked to her for a while, trying my best to keep my voice calm and even. I had announced my intention to go to bed, wished her good night, hung up the phone, and quickly sent a command to the spy program, requesting a quick series of pictures with the front camera. That's when she made a mistake. After our call, she put the phone not on the bedside table, but on the bed next to her. Consequently, the front-facing camera started sending slightly tilted, but candid photos. Images of her sitting astride another person with her head thrown back. This was followed by a recording that captured those unmistakable sounds that any husband would recognize, instantly revealing her actions. That was the last straw for me. I kept these notes and materials. Although at that moment, she was already a complete stranger to me. From that moment on, I refrained from further investigations until Sunday because everything became painfully clear. I was considering my next steps. Should I seek a divorce? What about our 9-year-old daughter? On Sunday, late at night, she came home eager to kiss me. I recoiled, reminding her that I was sick. I wanted to hit her to unleash my anger. Having retired to the office, I went to sleep on the sofa. The next morning, I got up before her and went to work, unable to be around her anymore. I'd endured the day mechanically, then approached my boss and asked for an urgent week's vacation. I recorded all the evidence on a flash drive, and then I called my wife, telling her that I was going on a business trip for 1 day, but asked her not to take our daughter away from her grandmother, as I had a surprise in store for her. That evening, when I got home, I quickly packed my bag. She helped me pack my things, behaving politely and innocently. However, her hypocrisy only inflamed my rage. I grabbed my bag, put the USB stick on the bedside table in the bedroom, and called a taxi to our second apartment, the one that was reserved for our daughter. Once there, I called a friend and offered to go abroad for a few days for a while. He agreed, and we quickly booked tickets for an early morning flight to Munich. It was there that I revealed everything to him. We drank, wandered around the city, and socialized with other women. To be honest, I no longer felt any affection for my wife. I ignored her calls and only sent her a message instructing her to insert the USB stick into my laptop. After about half an hour, my phone continuously lit up with calls and messages, but I refrained from reading any of them. I just didn't care anymore, so I turned off my phone. We continued our adventures in Munich for 3 more days before I flew home on Saturday. When I got back, I turned on my phone and it took me 5 minutes to process a lot of messages sent by my wife. However, I decided not to read them for fear of falling into confusion before entering the apartment. When I went inside, the atmosphere was eerily quiet. I silently put down my bag, took off my shoes, and was about to wash my hands when she came out of the bedroom. Oh my God. I've never seen her so disheveled and swollen with her face covered in tears. She fell to her knees, trying to explain something incoherently between sobs and slime. I kept a stony expression on my face, convincing her not to make a circus. Then, in a calm tone, I asked her what we were going to do next. She begged me to forgive. Again, tear snot. She said that she had played too much, that she did not understand how she had come to this. She started calling herself scum, etc. But you know, I caught myself thinking that I no longer feel pity or rage for her. She screamed that she loved and had always loved only me, and all this happened only because she got stuffed and realized during all the days that I was gone that she had broken our crystal castle with her own hand. But as they say, revenge is a dish that should be served cold. I said that now we are not husband and wife. Now we are just mom and just dad for our daughter. And we will pretend that everything is fine with us, but I will live my life and you can live yours. You're not the only one for me anymore. You're just my partner in raising a child. Maybe someday I'll change my mind, but now I'm just sick of just the thought of intimacy with her. By the way, I told her where I was and what I was doing. She said that she understood everything and was ready to endure as long as it took. Well, no one pulled her tongue. As a result, now we live in the same apartment. Although honestly, I've already bought another one for myself and issued it to my father so that there would be no claims in case of property division. I sleep almost constantly in the office, although sometimes I go to sleep in the bedroom for the sake of my daughter. On the part of my wife, there were a couple of attempts to try to hug me when I lay down in the same bed with her, but I stopped them harshly. We haven't had intimacy for 3 months. She didn't tell her parents anything. Only her father knows of mine. We agreed that once a year we go on vacation as a family for a week, but now it would be separate beds. I'm constantly hanging out with friends and have new acquaintances among them. There are beautiful women. I sometimes think when she'll come up and say that she's had enough and she leaves or, for example, files for divorce and we divide the property, but she doesn't. I constantly catch her looking at me. You know, like the look of a shriek cat, but I honestly don't give a shit. Although I see that she is trying, but I revel in her pain. Recently, I defiantly put a pack of condoms on the desk in the office to look at. Despite her reaction, she came in to say something, saw them on the table, and flew out of the office like a bullet, probably crying, did not catch up. She still goes to work, but she really doesn't stay late. Although honestly, I don't follow practically. Somehow, she came up and tried to explain to me that she had broken off all relations with that man except business, and it seems like at work, she will still have to communicate with him by letters or in negotiations, but she swears that she does not even approach him now. By the way, this freak also has a family, to which I told her that her relationship with sexual partners does not concern me and she is free to do what she wants. It is not necessary to report on whether she spread her legs today or not. I myself sometimes come back after midnight now or vice versa. I leave when my daughter goes to bed from Friday to Saturday for example. Naturally, I do not limit myself in anything. If I want sex, then it will definitely take place. I come in the morning and go to the office to sleep off or to the bedroom if she is not there anymore. Nothing has changed in the home routine. I still buy groceries. I love and know how to cook. We had cleaning on the incoming housekeeper, so nothing has changed here. I have been paying for the apartment and I am still paying. Where she spends her money and whether she spends it, I do not care. Communication like loving each other is only for our daughter or her parents if they come. Although it seems to me that if I tell my mother-in-law, she will probably strangle her right in front of my eyes. I have a great relationship with my mother-in-law. She is an intelligent woman and strictly respects family values. Surely, this is another argument why the wife does not want to leave. Apparently, she is afraid of her mother. Because mom will definitely ask the question what the hell is going on. And I am not going to lie. In general, I mock her as much as I can and I really enjoy it. Yes, maybe I have become a monster now, but she herself gave birth to that monster. And you know what amazes me? Her perseverance and patience. It's like a red flag to a bull for me. I wonder how much more she can take. And please don't start with the whole, she's the mother of your child, blah blah blah. What she was giving herself to that jerk, she didn't care much about that. For half a year, going on business trips or spreading her legs in the city without thinking about our daughter or her husband. No comment. Every time I feel like my armor will crack, I remember that day, what I felt back then and it eases me. I become stone again. So this is how I live now. Everything is fine with our daughter. We are great parents and I still help her with her lessons in the evenings. Our mutual friends know nothing. Maybe when I get tired of tormenting her or realize that enough is enough, I'll switch off the bastard mode and have a talk with her. But not now. Not now. Thank you for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Until next time, I'll see you again. Hey everyone, welcome back. Today, I've got an absolutely jaw-dropping story for you. My marriage with Melanie came to an end after just 3 years. I've fallen in love with someone else. Let's break up. Until then, I had been completely oblivious to her affair. Indeed, our conversations had dwindled recently. She often came home late, claiming overtime, and on weekends she found reasons to be away from home. I thought maybe that was just how marriage settles down after 3 years. I never imagined her heart had drifted so far from me. I put up with this countryside for 3 years. You should be grateful. You are all about your job, just job, you know? And never interested in me. She said with a displeased look. Whether I tried to discuss, deny, or apologize, her decision to divorce didn't change. Eventually, I signed the divorce papers as she demanded. Within a few days, Melanie packed her belongings and left with her new lover to her parents' home out of state. After she left, I stayed alone in the same house. My life became a cycle of work and home. The days just passed. The town where I was assigned after we got married is a quaint countryside area. Not heavily populated, the relationships with the locals were close-knit. Melanie never seemed to enjoy the rural life, and she didn't make close friends after we moved here. Yet, our divorce spread quickly, and I became known as the man who was dumped by his wife. People, both from the neighborhood and my workplace, looked at me with pity. Some directly asked, "That must have been tough, are you okay?" Or inquisitively, "Is it true your wife ran off with another man?" Honestly, the divorce hit me hard. I felt a gaping hole in my chest and longed to talk to someone, but in this small town, everything spreads fast. I didn't want that, so I kept to myself. To avoid sinking into despair, I threw myself into work even more than before. It seems my workaholic nature partly caused the loneliness Melanie felt. I had mistakenly thought that being diligent at work would make her happy. Now, all I had was my job. I was engrossed in my work, tuning out even the concerns of those around me. Then, about 6 months later, a new colleague joined our company. Her name was Susan Jackson, transferred from our New York headquarters. According to my boss, she is 36, 3 years my senior. She is with top sales performance at the headquarters and touted as a future department head. She was assigned to our branch for a year to boost its performance. With her understated yet tasteful makeup, she dressed in elegant suits, exuded the aura of sophisticated city woman. From day one, she efficiently reviewed our work, identifying current issues and future objectives. She was all business, with clear, concise instructions. She worked silently and diligently, efficiently completing her tasks one after another without any idle chatter. She was the epitome of a capable woman, which was incredibly cool. Yet, when asking for our help, she'd say, "Excuse me, do you have a moment?" With a humble, gentle smile. Despite her competence, she wasn't unapproachable and everyone at the branch was charmed by the contrast. Everyone admired and wanted to talk to her. She always finished her work on time, leaving with a cheerful, "Good job everyone," and swiftly headed home. The female coworkers wondered, she always leaves so quickly. Maybe she has a boyfriend waiting at home. Is she married? There was a buzz of curiosity about her, but nobody seemed to get close to her. Seeing her, I envied her ability to live life so smoothly. Since Susan came from the city, no one here knows her past. I'd like to live without people knowing my past, not worrying about others' opinions. I've started to think that, in this town, everything becomes known quickly. I had resigned myself to that fact because it's a small town, but seeing Susan's behavior, I've started to wonder if moving to a city like hers would clear up my worries. Also, I thought about joining the headquarters to improve my skills, inspired by someone as high caliber as her. So, I seriously started discussing a transfer to our New York headquarters with my boss. Then one day, a welcome party for Susan was planned. We all left work on time and headed to a nearby bar. That day, Susan didn't rush home at her usual time but joined us for dinner. As the party started, everyone eagerly bombarded her with questions. What kind of work did she do at the headquarters? When did she become the top salesperson? What's her secret? She answered each question meticulously. After a while, the questions shifted to her personal life. Was she married? Did she have a boyfriend? Just as she was about to answer these more personal questions, her phone rang. "Excuse me for a moment." She stepped outside to take the call. The questioning paused and the room fell silent. Then, a drunk coworker, Edward, started pestering me. "Is it true your wife cheated on you?" Suddenly, all eyes were on me. "It's over and done with." I tried to deflect, but the inebriated coworker relentlessly prodded. "Did you get any compensation? Did you hire a lawyer?" No one else intervened, seemingly curious themselves. I didn't want to remember any of it. Frustration built up in me and I was about to snap. Then, "Sorry for stepping out. I'm back now," Susan announced with a smile, sitting down between Edward and me. Then she resumed with a smile. "We were in the middle of questions, weren't we?" And began talking about her personal life. She revealed she was divorced. She had a daughter at 20, now in high school. She got pregnant while in college, took a break to have her daughter, and divorced at 30 due to her ex-husband's infidelity. She shared all that. "My daughter lives with my parents in New York." That call was from her. Ended with sweetly smile. She then lightened the mood with more cheerful topics, and neither my story nor hers came up again. I was relieved and deeply grateful to her. Her strength in openly discussing her situation also struck a chord with me. The next day, I caught up with her as she was leaving work on time. "Susan, I really appreciated what you did last night." "Thank you." I called out to her. She stopped and turned with her usual graceful smile. "I should be thanking you for the wonderful welcome party." She responded with her usual graceful and gentle smile, but sensing my feelings weren't fully conveyed, I anxiously continued speaking. No, I mean, you heard the questions I was getting from Edward, right? Stepping in and diverting the attention from me really helped. I find it really tough to talk in detail about my divorce, I said, scratching my head awkwardly, and she nodded understandingly. I get it. It's hard to put into words when the divorce is still fresh. The pain is normal. As she answered gently gazing distantly, I asked hesitantly. Because of me, everyone ended up learning about your past. Are you okay with that? I was concerned she might have reluctantly taken my place, not wanting to share her own story. I was really worried that she had put herself out there as a substitute for me. Sensing my inner turmoil, she showed an even gentler smile, as if understanding my concerns. Time has healed my wounds. You'll be okay, too. Time resolves these things. She reassured me. She waved. See you tomorrow. Lightly and walked away, leaving me feeling almost dreamy as I watched her go. From then on, we began to chat during breaks at work and sometimes after work. Susan talked to her daughter every day at 6 p.m., explaining why she never stayed late. Sharing her secret made me feel a ticklish sense of camaraderie. She spent her weekends in New York with her daughter. My daughter, Catherine, loves baking. She's always made something for me to try when I visit. It's something I really look forward to, Susan would say with a tender, almost melting smile, and watching her became a daily highlight for me. Eager to talk more with her, I started working more efficiently to leave work on time, just like her. Until 6 p.m., when she would call her daughter, we'd chat outside the office. To ensure our time together, I worked harder and harder. But that wasn't like right after my divorce when I was trying to forget something. Making an effort to create time to talk with Susan, even when tired, felt somehow gratifying and pleasant. It was a bitterly cold Friday in February. By then, our post-work chats had become a daily routine. With the onset of colder weather, we had taken to talking in a cafe after work instead of outside. It was almost 6 p.m. Once the time passed, we would have 2 days off starting tomorrow. We wouldn't see each other for 2 days as she usually went to New York every weekend. I want to talk more. I want to spend more time with her. Unable to contain my feelings, I blurted out, I wish I could go with you tomorrow. Sorry? She looked surprised realizing what I'd said. I covered my mouth, but it was too late. Seeing my flustered and red face, she chuckled softly. Sure, you can come. I'd like you to meet my daughter too. Shocked yet elated at her consent, I mentally did a victory dance. The next day, Susan and I boarded the plane together, heading to her hometown in New York. Although I'd been there a few times, its bustling crowd always overwhelmed me. And I was incredibly nervous. Her daughter and parents were at her house. I wondered if it was okay for a guy like me to just show up. I just hoped not to leave a bad impression. Nervously, I entered her house. Her daughter, looking a lot like her, and her kind-looking parents warmly welcomed me. I was ushered into the living room and exchanged greetings with everyone. We've heard how kind you've been to Susan since her transfer, thank you. Her parents said with their appreciation. Flustered, I talked about the town where we worked and her accomplishments at the company. Time flew by, and it was almost time for my flight back. Although Susan was supposed to stay overnight, she kindly took me to the airport with her daughter. As we neared the departure gate, her daughter Catherine silently handed me a paper bag. Oh, thank you. Is this for me? She looked up shyly and whispered. I heard it's almost your birthday, so I made you some chocolates. I'm good at making sweets. Thank you for making my mom happy. Hearing that, Susan turned red to the ears and panicked, who is usually composed. You made this just for me? Yes. I wanted to give chocolates to my mom's favorite person. Catherine replied playfully, dodging Susan's attempt to cover her mouth and sticking out her tongue. Their interaction was heartwarming, and I felt incredibly happy. Thank you. Receiving chocolates from the daughter of someone I like makes me the luckiest man. I replied sincerely, a bit shyly, and Catherine covered her face with her hands, squealing. Wow. Susan and I exchanged smiles, both blushing at her cute reaction. The following Monday of that weekend, I followed Susan after work as usual. Thanks for Saturday. The chocolates were delicious. Turning to my voice, Susan appeared a bit bashful, and she pulled a neatly wrapped small package from her bag. Do you know what day it is today? I nodded enthusiastically, taking the package carefully. Of course, I knew. It was my actual birthday, and I'd been restless all day. Thank you. I'm so happy. Can I join you at your parents' place again? She looked at me seriously. Be prepared, it's going to be tough. My parents and Catherine seem to like you. They said to bring you again. I bet they'll want you every week. Her smile betraying her embarrassment, and I felt enveloped in happiness again. Just today, my boss hinted that my request to transfer to New York might soon be granted. My recent hard work had been recognized. Susan's assignment here would end in a few months. If my transfer goes through, it would surely bring us closer. Even if it doesn't, I plan to visit her family every weekend by plane, and if needed, I'm willing to change jobs. When my ex-wife Melanie told me that I wasn't interested in her, I didn't quite understand, but meeting Susan, I believe for the first time I truly learned to love someone. While I don't regret divorcing her, I've reflected a lot. I'm determined to build a happy home with Susan, the precious person I've finally found. No matter how hard it is, the thought of this effort fills me with an invigorating sense of purpose. Stick around until the end to see how everything unfolded, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more intense stories.